Bin Laden Operation Hero slams U.S. Navy over drag queen. Former Navy SEAL Team 6 member Robert O'Neill has joined a chorus of veterans expressing disgust. Former U.S. Navy SEAL Robert O'Neill, a member of the legendary SEAL Team 6 credited with taking out al-Qaeda mastermind Osama bin Laden, ripped into his former employer for using an enlisted sailor drag queen as a recruiter on Wednesday. "I'm done. China is going to destroy us. You got this, Navy," O'Neill tweeted, concluding, "I can't believe I fought for this bulls." O'Neill was referring to the Navy's selection of Yeoman Second Class Joshua Kelly, or rather, Kelly's drag persona Harpy Daniels, as one of the Pentagon's inaugural class of digital ambassadors. Kelly, who identifies as non-binary, performs for service members in full makeup, women's dress, and a bouffant blonde wig. The former SEAL, who claims to have personally delivered the fatal blow to bin Laden during the May 2011 raid on his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, was far from the only veteran to publicly call out the Pentagon's platforming of the flamboyant sailor. "This is not the same military I served under," U.S. Army veteran Graham Allen tweeted, lamenting, "Our enemies laugh at us." Mike Marriage, whose Twitter profile describes him as a veteran of 21 years, called the program an insult to every veteran, while another Twitter user going by Johnny Fuseball claimed the writing was on the wall when he left the military in 2010. Pointing to the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell ban on open homosexuality in the service and the decision to allow women into the infantry as the start of its downfall. Former Space Force Lieutenant Col. Matthew Lohmeyer, who was relieved of his command in 2021 for criticizing the military's embrace of critical race theory as Marxist and un-American, told Fox News' Jesse Waters that while the military's embrace of the drag performer was no longer surprising, what's surprising is that senior military leaders continue to push an agenda like this despite the fact that it's hurting our recruiting efforts and it's hurting our retention, and frankly it can't help our lethality and our readiness. Kelly took to Instagram to post a rebuttal proclaiming the sailor DGAF doesn't give a fuck, while flouncing and twirling in and out of drag. Accusing detractors of only wanting to support the military when it benefits you and doesn't involve queer people, the performer claimed the haters were only piling on for clout. China issues report on U.S. CIA's cyberattacks on other countries. China on Thursday released an investigation report revealing an empire of hackers of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, of the United States, one of the major intelligence agencies of the country's federal government. Over a long period, the CIA has been secretly orchestrating peaceful evolution and color revolutions around the world, continuously conducting espionage activities, said the joint report by China's National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center and Beijing-based internet security company 360. The report disclosed important details of the weapons the CIA used for cyber attacks and details of specific cybersecurity cases taking place in China and other countries. The CIA has been involved in overthrowing or attempting to overthrow more than 50 legal governments of other countries, though it only admitted involvement in 7, causing turmoil in relevant countries, the report said. Cyberspace hegemony. In 2020, the 360 company discovered an unknown cyber attack organization, which carried out a slew of cyber attacks toward China and other countries by utilizing cyber tools related to Vault 7, a series of documents that WikiLeaks began to publish in 2017 to expose the CIA's activities and capabilities in electronic surveillance and cyber warfare. Such cyber attacks can be traced back to the year 2011, and continue to this day. The targets of such espionage actions expand to fields such as countries' key information infrastructure, the aerospace sector, scientific research institutes, the petroleum industry and tech companies, as well as government agencies. The CIA has complicated inner workings. By the end of 2016, there were already over 5,000 hackers in the CIA's Hacking Division, Center for Cyber Intelligence, producing more than 1,000 hacking systems, trojans, viruses, and other weaponized malware, according to WikiLeaks. Yuan Tanshan, a social media account affiliated with China Media Group, commented that the complexity of the organizational structure enables the CIA to tailor different tools to steal information. For example, the agency divulged users' secrets through smart TVs with their attack toolkit, Weeping Angel, developed by the Embedded Devices branch. The toolkit can make TVs pretend to be switched off, but in fact, they are still overhearing. The report also noted that the Chinese technical team obtained a sample of an information interception tool that is exclusively used by the U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, indicating that the CIA and the NSA may jointly attack the same target, share attack weapons with each other, or provide technological or personnel assistance to each other. Since 2015, the CIA massively has taken advantage of zero-day vulnerabilities in its global cyber attacks, setting up zombie botnets and stepping stones around the world to launch attacks on network servers, network terminals, exchangers, and routers, as well as a huge amount of industrial control equipment, according to the report. In the joint investigation, the team captured a plethora of malware such as Trojan programs and plugins related to the CIA. All the cyber-attacking weapons were strictly standardized, processed, and underwent professional software engineering management, and only the CIA abides by these standards and specifications to develop cyber-attack weapons. The investigation also found that the CIA's cyber attacks cover all networks, which enables the agency to easily steal sensitive data of other countries at any time. U.S. May attempt coup in Turkey during upcoming presidential election, Turkish minister. Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu said on Wednesday that on May 14, the United States will attempt to finish the coup d'état they tried to carry out during the 2016 presidential election. They failed to do it during the attempted coup, now they will try it again during the election. Will it be only here in Turkey? They tried to do it in Hungary. Hungarian President Viktor Orbán threw George Soros out of Hungary. They nominated 3 candidates for the presidency against Orbán, he said in an interview with a Turkish broadcaster. Soylu added that Hungarian Interior Minister Sandor Pinter had warned him about the U.S. providing financial support for Turkish non-governmental organizations in order to interfere with the upcoming election. He also accused the U.S. of orchestrating coups in Turkey in 1960 and 1971. The minister said there was a recording of a meeting between a person now making many statements with an ambassador of one interested country, who was briefed on how to make a mess 4 months prior by his interior minister during the latter's visit to Turkey. However, Soylu refused to name the country and the person in question. Soylu expressed confidence that incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan would easily win the presidential election already in the first round of voting. God willing, we will finish in the first round, it is evident from the polls. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and the Republican People's Party are behind us, the minister said. He noted, however, that no one knows what might happen in Turkey in the 11 days remaining before the election. Meanwhile, a poll conducted by Turkish company İdem showed that Erdogan could win the second round 3% ahead of the opposing candidate. Presidential and parliamentary elections are scheduled to be held in Turkey on May 14. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, put forward by a 7-party opposition alliance, is considered Erdogan's main opponent. The list of presidential candidates also includes Sinan and Sinan Ogan of the Ada alliance. If none of them manages to win more than 50% of the votes, a second round will be scheduled on May 28. South Korean groups rally to protest Japanese PM's upcoming visit. South Korea's main opposition Democratic Party and representatives of civic groups rallied on Thursday, protesting Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's upcoming visit to Seoul. Kishida is scheduled to visit South Korea for 2 days from Sunday to confirm cooperation with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. The visit is hoped to pave the way for the Group of 7 summit in Japan later this month. Kishida has invited Yoon to attend the gathering. Thursday's rally was filled with banners, criticizing Japan for distorting history, exploiting forced Korean labor and comfort women during World War II, planning to release nuclear-polluted water into the sea and forging military alliances with the US and Japan. Days ahead of Kishida's trip to Seoul, a verbal duel over disputed islets had been sparked between the two countries. On Tuesday, a South Korean lawmaker visited the Dokdo Islets, also called the Takeshima Islands in Japan, which are currently under the control of South Korea, but Japan claims them, saying South Korea is illegally occupying them. The Japanese Foreign Ministry said the visit took place despite Japan's opposition and demands for it to be called off, and Japan had lodged a protest against the lawmakers' landing on the islets, which is absolutely unacceptable. The South Korean Foreign Ministry rejected Japan's protest, calling it an unfair claim and said Dokdo is South Korea's sovereign territory historically, geographically, and under international law. Tokyo and Seoul have long been at odds over issues related to Japan's colonial rule of the Korean peninsula between 1910 and 1945. The relationship had plunged to the lowest point over wartime labor compensation under the previous administration. Relations improved under the conservative government of Yoon, who took office in May 2022, with Seoul proposing a solution to the issue in early March. Yoon paid his first visit to Tokyo on March 16. The two sides agreed to restart reciprocal visits by Japanese and South Korean leaders, which had been suspended since 2011. However, South Korea's opposition parties have been increasingly critical of Yoon's administration of making compromises to Japan. Moscow says U.S. behind Kremlin drone attack. Ukraine had acted on U.S. orders with the drone attack on the Kremlin that aimed to kill Russian President Vladimir Putin in the early hours of Wednesday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday. Attempts to disown this attack on the Kremlin, both in Kiev and in Washington, are, of course, absolutely ridiculous. We know very well that decisions about such actions, about such terrorist attacks, are made not in Kiev but in Washington, Peskov told reporters. An urgent investigation is underway and any response would be carefully considered and balanced, according to Peskov. The White House was quick to reject the charge. Ukraine has also denied involvement in the incident. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby told MSNBC television on Thursday the Russian claims were false, and that Washington does not encourage or enable Ukraine to strike outside its borders. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kiev had nothing to do with the reported overnight incident during a visit to Finland. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova also noted on Thursday that Washington, London, and NATO in general are ultimately responsible for all of the Ukrainian government's actions. They destroyed the lawful government in Ukraine, in 2014, put crooks and bandits in charge, provided them with money and weapons, imbued them with a sense of absolute impunity and provided political cover and military support, Zakharova added. The Kremlin has said the military and special services used radar warfare to put the unmanned aerial vehicles of Wednesday's attack out of action. Despite the attack, no casualties or material damage were reported from the downing of the drones and the resulting scattering of fragments, the Kremlin said. Laughable claims by West that Kremlin attacked itself similar to Nord Stream fallacies. Two UAVs attempted to strike the Kremlin in Moscow on May 3 in what Russia says was a Ukrainian assassination attempt on President Vladimir Putin. The drones were downed through the use of electronic warfare equipment. The Kremlin said that no injuries or material damage was caused. Kiev has denied involvement in the attack. Speculation in the Western media that the May 3 attack on the Kremlin by unmanned aerial vehicles, UAV, was planned by Moscow itself are no better than the ludicrous allegations that Russia blew up its own Nord Stream gas pipelines, American journalist and lawyer Glenn Greenwald has said. Greenwald went on Twitter to dismiss such claims as laughable, and included in his post a link to a story in a U.S. media publication. The outlet in question was referring to Wednesday's incident, when two drones approaching the Kremlin were spotted by Russian security personnel who immediately moved to intercept and neutralize the threat. Both UAVs were brought down with the help of electronic warfare equipment, with their debris scattered on the Kremlin's premises. According to the Kremlin's press service, the attack did not result in any injuries or material damage. When the attack was launched days ahead of Victory Day, a major Russian holiday commemorating this country's victory over Nazi Germany in the Second World War. Otherwise known as the Great Patriotic War, President Vladimir Putin, who has continued to perform his duties, was not present at the Kremlin, his press service announced. In a statement issued later that day, the Kremlin described this attack as a planned terrorist act and an attempt on the life of the President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin. After the incident, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin announced a ban on the use of UAVs in the city, except for those used by state authorities. The regime in Kiev responded to the attack by denying any involvement. "We didn't attack Putin," Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said. Speaking from Helsinki, Finland, during a meeting with the leaders of Nordic states and Zelensky's advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, went so far as to suggest that domestic opponents of the Russian president could be responsible for the attack. The developments come as speculation has gone wild about Ukraine's planned spring offensive, as well as in the wake of a series of high-profile sabotage and terrorist attacks in Crimea foiled by the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB. Western media speculation that the Kremlin itself was responsible for the incident involving the UAVs can, in fact, be likened to claims surrounding the Nord Stream sabotage. The Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines, built to deliver gas under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany, were hit by explosions last September. Nord Stream's operator, Nord Stream AG, said that the damage was unprecedented and it was impossible to estimate how long it would take to repair. Russia considers the explosions at the two pipelines an act of international terrorism. Although there are no official results of the investigation yet, U.S. journalist and Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh alleged that the explosions were organized by the United States with the support of Norway. After Hersh's report, Moscow reiterated its calls for an impartial and thorough investigation. The U.S. has denied its involvement in the incident, with Washington and its NATO allies initially even trying to implicate Russia in the bombing attack that severed 3 out of 4 undersea pipelines on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 route from Russia to Germany. Western media outlets unreasonably prefer to blame Russia for everything. We would prefer that they pay more attention to the topic of the terrorist attacks on Nord Stream and the need for a transparent, urgent, and broad international investigation of these unprecedented terrorist acts of sabotage, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters back in April. F-16 shipment to Taiwan delayed, Minister. The arrival of the first batch of new U.S. aircraft was pushed to 2024, the top defense official said. Delivery of 66 F-16V fighter jets from the U.S. to Taiwan has been delayed due to pandemic-related production and supply chain problems, the island's defense minister, Chu Kuo-cheng, said on Thursday. The first batch of jets was supposed to be delivered in the fourth quarter of this year, but has been pushed to the third quarter of 2024. Chu said authorities asked the U.S. to make up the deficiency, and were working with the de facto U.S. Embassy in Taipei and using other diplomatic channels. We are minimizing the damage, the minister said, adding that the full order was still expected to be delivered before 2026. The Focus Taiwan news outlet quoted Chu as saying that the $8 billion contract signed in 2019 did not include financial penalties for late delivery and that the U.S. promised to provide spare parts ahead of schedule. The new shipments would bring Taiwan's F-16 fleet to more than 200 aircraft, making it the largest in Asia, according to Reuters. Taipei is working to upgrade its aircraft in response to the heightened tensions with mainland China, with Beijing and Washington accusing each other of dangerous escalation in the Taiwan Strait and the larger Asia-Pacific. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry said on Thursday that 16 People's Liberation Army jets and 9 warships were detected close to the island's coasts. Beijing held large-scale military drills around Taiwan last month following the visit of the island's president, Tsai Ing-wen, to the U.S. Beijing considers the island, which has been ruled by a separate government since the late 1940s, its territory, and strongly opposes foreign contacts with the Taipei authorities. The U.S. formally upholds the One China policy by refraining from officially recognizing Taiwan as an independent state but has sold weapons to the island and promised to defend it from a potential attack from the mainland. Last year, Taiwan complained that deliveries of M109A6 Paladin self-propelled howitzers were delayed due to the pandemic. Taipei also raised concerns that shipments of Stinger air defense missile systems could be held up because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In April, a group of U.S. legislators that visited Taiwan urged the White House to speed up delivery of $21 billion worth of backlogged weapon sales promised to Taipei. Police arrest suspect in fatal mass shooting at Atlanta Medical Center. Police have arrested a former U.S. Coast Guardsman suspected of killing one person and wounding four, all of them women, in a shooting on Wednesday at a medical building in Atlanta, then carjacking a vehicle to flee the scene, authorities said. The suspected gunman, identified as Dion Patterson, 24, was taken into custody without incident after an undercover officer spotted him north of the city in suburban Cobb County several hours after the 12:30 p.m. shooting at the Northside Medical Facility, police said. The motive for the shooting, and whether the suspect knew or targeted any of his victims, had yet to be determined, police said. The woman who died was 39. The four wounded women ranged in age from 25 to 71, media reported. 3 of them were in critical condition, officials said. The hospital said that the facility in Midtown Atlanta will be closed on Thursday and that all patient appointments stand cancelled. Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens decried the shooting as the latest act of carnage in what has become a national epidemic of gun violence, turning schools, workplaces, churches, and doctors' offices into potential killing zones. He said active shooter drills have become so common that a business in the area of Cobb County, where Patterson was arrested, happened to be conducting such an exercise as police closed in on the suspect nearby. The shooting comes as cities around the U.S. have been racked by gun violence and mass shootings in 2023. A total of 190 mass shootings have taken place in the United States so far this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which defines a mass shooting as one in which at least 4 people are shot, excluding the shooter. More than 14,200 people have lost their lives due to gun violence across the country in the past several months, the website's data showed. German police investigate media that reported Zelensky plans. A Berlin newspaper was accused of betrayed secrets by revealing the Ukrainian leader's upcoming visit. German authorities on Thursday opened a betrayal of secrets probe into a newspaper report about a possible visit of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, which quoted an unnamed source within the Berlin police. Berlin Police Chief Barbara Slowik denounced the anonymous official as damaging the reputation of the Berlin police in such a shameful way, at home and internationally. The fact that newspaper headlines are given higher priority than the reliability of the Berlin police and the trust placed in us is in no way tolerable, Slowik said, adding that she has asked the state police to investigate the case as betrayal of official secrets. Police did not name the outlet in which the unnamed official was quoted, but the French news agency AFP identified it as Berliner Zeitung. The story allegedly contained classified details of the security operation being planned to safeguard the Ukrainian leader. At no time did the Berlin police officially provide any information that endangered the state visit, the department said in a statement, explaining that their press office only confirmed the impending operation in response to inquiries based on previous media reports. Berliner Zeitung had reported on Wednesday that police were preparing for a visit by Zelensky in mid-May. The Ukrainian leader was in Helsinki at the time. On Thursday, he resurfaced in the Netherlands, as part of his European tour to drum up support in the conflict against Russia. Zelensky's already twitchy security has been elevated after Wednesday morning's drone attack on the Kremlin. Moscow declared it a premeditated terrorist action and an attempted assassination of Russian President Vladimir Putin, warning Kiev that it reserves the right to retaliate in a manner, place, and time of our choosing. Ukraine has denied any knowledge or participation in the attack, just as it had with the attacks on the Crimean Bridge, or the assassinations of blogger Vladimir Tatarsky and journalist Daria Dugina. The Ukrainian Postal Service quickly issued a stamp design showing the Kremlin in flames, however. Iranian president calls for U.S. exit to ensure Syria's security. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi on Wednesday called for the U.S. withdrawal from Syria to ensure the Arab state's security. Raisi made the remarks at a joint press conference with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad following their meeting in Damascus earlier in the day, according to a statement published on the website of the Iranian president's office. The sooner the Americans exit from Syria, the more effectively Syria's security will be guaranteed, he noted. Raisi said Iran maintains that the U.S. presence in Syria not only fails to be of any contribution to the Arab country's security, but also compromises its security and that of the entire region. He stressed that Iran's foreign policy is based on expanding relations with regional countries without the involvement of foreign powers, noting that foreign powers' presence in the region does not guarantee security. Raisi said Iran believes that the establishment of the Syrian government's complete sovereignty over the entire Syrian territory is the way to ensure the country's security and that of the entire region. He said the status quo in Iran and Syria is proof of the rightfulness and correctness of the two countries' resistance against U.S. pressures. Countries that failed to achieve their evil objectives through military actions are making bids to pursue their goals through economic pressures and sanctions, which will definitely end in failure, Raisi said. Raisi arrived in Damascus on Wednesday for a two-day visit, during which he is scheduled to hold extensive political and economic talks with his Syrian counterpart, according to Syria's state news agency SANA. Members of the delegation accompanying the Iranian president include Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, Defense Minister Mohammad Reza Ashtiani and other senior officials. Sudan's military agrees to 7-day humanitarian truce. The Sudanese armed forces have agreed to a 7-day humanitarian truce, proposed by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, in Eastern Africa, from May 4 to 11, the military said on Wednesday. The armed forces expressed their approval of the IGAD's proposal, based on the principle of an African solution to the problems of the continent, and taking into account the humanitarian aspects of our citizens, the military said in a statement. Sudan's army also continues to consider the US-Saudi ceasefire initiative, the statement read. We hope that the rebels, the Rapid Support Forces, will respect the requirements of the proposed truce, the military said. On Tuesday, the Foreign Ministry of South Sudan said the leaders of the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Response Forces, RSF, have agreed to the truce from May 4 to 11. According to the statement, Gen. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the chairman of the Sovereign Council and the commander-in-chief of the Sudan military, and RSF leader Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo agreed to name their representatives to begin negotiations. However, Yusuf Izzat, an advisor to RSF leader Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, said on Tuesday that the RSF has yet to agree to the truce, stressing the RSF does not reject the truce and welcomes all initiatives aimed at resolving the internal conflict in Sudan. Gen. Brigadier Nabil Abdullah, the Sudanese military spokesman, told Sputnik Tuesday that Saudi American mediators of the ongoing conflict in Sudan have proposed to hold negotiations between the sides in Saudi Arabia's city of Jeddah. On April 15, violent clashes broke out between the Sudanese regular armed forces and the RSF, with the epicenter located in Khartoum. The parties to the conflict have introduced a number of temporary nationwide ceasefires since then, but none has helped in settling the conflict yet. According to the Sudanese Health Ministry, at least 550 people have been killed in the conflict, and nearly 5,000 have been injured. Russia committed to major oil production cuts, Novak. Supplies to the EU have already dropped by 2/3, Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak says. Russia remains committed to a voluntary oil production cut of 500,000 barrels per day, BPD, Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak stated on Thursday, commenting on speculation in the media. Bloomberg claimed on Tuesday that there was no evidence that Moscow was implementing a production cut, citing tanker tracking data. Aggregate flows of Russian crude jumped to 4.08 million BPD in the 7 days to April 28, according to the outlet. Novak argued that the media had failed to take into account a significant reduction in pipeline supplies to the EU, which he said had already dropped by more than two-thirds and were only partly offset by maritime shipments. The target level of a voluntary output reduction amounts to 500,000 barrels per day from February levels until the end of 2023, Novak noted, adding that monitoring will be carried out by independent sources. In February, Russia pledged to voluntarily reduce oil production by 500,000 BPD starting from March. The move came in retaliation to sanctions, while Moscow also halted sales to buyers that comply with a Western-imposed price ceiling of $60 a barrel. According to Bloomberg, no Russian crude was shipped to northern European countries in the 4 weeks to April 28. Moscow's seaborne oil exports to European countries slid to 63,000 BPD in the 28 days to April 28, with Bulgaria remaining the sole destination, the outlet said. Russia has diversified its energy supplies in response to Western sanctions since the EU stopped accepting the country's oil transported by sea. Novak revealed last week that Moscow will reroute more than 60% of its oil and petroleum products exports from the EU to Asia this year. According to the official, of the 220 million tons of crude and refined products previously destined for the EU, Russia will reorient 140 million tons to Asia. Trading halted in shares of Western Alliance, latest U.S. bank in trouble after PacWest. Trading in the shares of Western Alliance Bank Corporation was halted on Thursday as they plunged 25% in value after the Phoenix-based lender joined Los Angeles-based PacWest in becoming the latest U.S. banking casualties. Trading in Western Alliance was suspended at $16.19 a share, versus its previous year's high of $86.87, by the New York Stock Exchange, which was waiting for additional information, U.S. media reports said. As late as Wednesday, Western Alliance said it had not experienced any unusual deposit outflows, which had been the main reason for the spate of U.S. banking failures over the past 2 months. The U.S. media reported on Thursday that Western Alliance was mulling options, including a potential sale. If indeed true, it would be the latest U.S. bank to be sold after San Francisco-based First Republic, which earlier this week was acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest U.S. banking group. Western Alliance is also the 5th U.S. lender in trouble after Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, the two rescued by the U.S. government's Federal Insurance Deposit Corporation in March, and PacWest, whose shares were also tumbling on Thursday. Shares of PacWest were at $2.57 at the time of writing, down 60% on the day, versus their previous year's high of $34.21. Pentagon rethinks F-35 spare parts purchase scheme as jet hemorrhages money. The 5th-gen do-it-all aircraft is shaping up to be the most expensive weapons system in history, with a combined estimated lifetime price tag of $1.7 trillion, equivalent to the entire annual GDP of a major G20 economy like South Korea or Australia. The U.S. Department of Defense reportedly plans to rework the way it buys spare parts for its fleet of Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II jets. According to U.S. media, the reforms will replace a payments for parts and services rendered model with performance-based logistics, PBL, under which the contractor would be paid based on specific performance outcomes. The shakeup has been dubbed a cost-cutting measure that would save the Pentagon, and consequently U.S. taxpayers, money while improving spare parts availability. However, the fact that PBL is a purchase model which Lockheed Martin itself has been aggressively lobbying for since 2019 raises questions about its true purpose and efficacy. The DoD's F-35 Joint Program Office hopes to award a PBL agreement limited to spare parts, but not support and sustainment, as proposed by Lockheed, for a 5-year term, pending a review by the Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Office for Congress. F-35 Joint Program Office Product Support Manager Ed Apollo expects a PBL-based agreement on spare parts to push the defense giant to improve parts longevity. The lower the demand, the more gravy for industry. The higher the demand, the less the profit margins are. That is the number one benefit that we're looking at in the performance-based logistics contract, he said. But the official did not explain the motivation for Lockheed Martin to push such a major shakeup in its F-35 supply contract with the Pentagon if it means losing money. Brad Martin, director of the National Security Supply Chain Institute at Rand Corporation, a Washington-based security-focused think tank, warned that PBL contracts will essentially result in the Pentagon ceding an awful lot of discretion to defense companies as to how they're going to fill the orders and how they're going to deal with the demand. Martin expects PBL to stimulate Lockheed to build up inventories of parts sufficient for peacetime operations, but questions whether the new purchasing scheme, which deprives the military of the ability to control to the last screw how many parts must be bought, will be adequate in event of a major conflict. Such a shakeup would likely result in an exacerbation of the jet's existing just-in-time supply chain problems, in which a single issue anywhere along the line threatens to ground planes and leave them unusable. But the Pentagon is apparently placing its hopes on the idea that change will mean improvement, given that under today's model, the U.S. F-35 fleet faces an overall mission-capable readiness rate of just 56%, below the 70% sought by the Air Force, and 75% by the Navy. Dan Grazier, a defense analyst at the Project on Government Oversight, a Washington-based nonprofit, says that a rejiggering of the F-35's parts purchase contracts by the Pentagon, which is by far the biggest buyer of the plane, might also affect the other countries which have bought it. Who knows what some of these partner countries might get themselves into moving forward? He asked. The F-35, Lockheed's promised do-it-all multi-role fighter for the Air Force, Navy, and Marines, is the largest defense contract in history, with a total expected purchase and sustainment price tag of more than $1.7 trillion and climbing, and an individual unit price tag of $70.2–$89.3 million. The US and Israel have already made limited use of the F-35 in combat against ill-equipped terrorist groups and small drones. However, the aircraft have never come up against the aircraft or air defenses of a major peer adversary. Nearly a dozen US and Allied F-35s have crashed or been lost, including a fatal incident involving a Japan Air Self-Defense Force F-35A in 2019 which left its pilot dead. Years after its introduction, the plane continues to suffer a series of significant, and costly, bugs, glitches, and hardware problems, from cabin overpressurization to software issues. In 2022, the Government Accountability Office reported that there were 4 Category 1 deficiencies and over 800 Category 2 problems with the plane. On top of that, the F-35's top adversaries have been working around the clock to defeat its systems. Last week, for example, the chief of Iran's top military electronics concern revealed that the Islamic Republic had developed technologies allowing Iran to identify the radar signature of individual F-35 jets using advanced homegrown radar systems. Stone Age blockchain, scholars to link ancient artifacts to their owners by DNA. Archaeologists have discovered an Upper Paleolithic deer tooth pendant in the famous Denisova cave in Russia. The pendant was made between 19,000 and 25,000 years ago, and the researchers were able to reconstruct a precise genetic profile of the woman who used or wore the pendant, as well as of the deer from which the tooth was taken. An interdisciplinary research team, led by the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, has developed a novel, non-destructive method for DNA isolation from bones and teeth. This breakthrough in ancient DNA research will enable researchers to directly link cultural objects to specific individuals and thus gain deeper insights into Paleolithic societies. Artifacts made of stone, bones, or teeth provide important insights into the subsistence strategies of early humans, their behavior and culture. However, until now, it has been difficult to attribute these artifacts to specific individuals, since burials and grave goods were very rare in that era. This has limited the possibilities of drawing conclusions about, for example, division of labor or the social roles of individuals during this period. The scientists focused specifically on artifacts made from skeletal elements, because these are more porous and are therefore more likely to retain DNA present in skin cells, sweat, and other body fluids. They tested the influence of various chemicals on the surface structure of archaeological bone and tooth pieces and developed a non-destructive phosphate-based method for DNA extraction. This new way for DNA isolation from bones and teeth will enable researchers to directly identify the users of ornaments and tools produced in the distant past, providing deeper insights into Paleolithic communities. Artifacts made of stone, bones, or teeth provide important information about the subsistence strategies of early humans, their behavior, and culture. Pepet Escobar, U.S. outmatched by Russia, China. The Biden administration's policy of simultaneously confronting both Russia and China is doomed to fail, Pepet Escobar, geopolitical analyst and veteran journalist, told Radio Sputnik's New Rules podcast. It's so absurd, that obviously these neocons, they haven't even read Zbigniew Brzezinski, Escobar said, referring to the ex-US national security advisor and influential strategist. Okay, let's say he was a Democrat-linked neocon, but he was talking about this in the 90s already when he wrote The Grand Chessboard published in 1997. He was already saying, we have to prevent the emergence of a peer competitor in Eurasia by any means necessary. So what do we have now? We have the emergence of a strategic partnership of peer competitors across Eurasia, and the response of the neocons is, okay, let's go to war against both of them at the same time. Even a kid knows this is completely absurd. How Brzezinski's nightmare turned into reality. Under the Biden administration, Washington's relations with Moscow and Beijing hit a new low. Having snubbed Russia's security draft proposals concerning NATO enlargement and Ukraine's neutrality, the U.S. ramped up military aid to the Kiev regime after the beginning of Moscow's Special Military Operation, SMO, to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. The Biden administration not only slapped Russia with sanctions and derailed the March 2022 Istanbul preliminary peace accords between Moscow and Kiev, but openly called for bleeding Russia white and imposing strategic defeat on the nation. Simultaneously, Washington resorted to a series of provocations against China over Taiwan, the island located at the junction of the East and South China Seas, which Beijing regards as an inalienable part of the People's Republic. House Speakers Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy met with Taiwanese leader Tsai Ing-wen in what was seen by Beijing as a clear defiance of One China principle, while President Joe Biden issued repeated gaffes that the U.S. is ready to protect the island militarily from the People's Republic. Recently, the Pentagon has speeded up the provision of weapons to Taipei as the latter is bracing for the January 2024 presidential elections. Despite these provocative moves, the U.S. military is not ready for a full-fledged confrontation with China, according to Escobar. They won't fight real wars, the veteran journalist said. And now they are even more freaked out because they know, for instance, if they try something in the South China Sea, the Chinese have the famous carrier killers all over the coast. So, if you have 3 or 4 American complexes navigate over there, they can be sunk in 30 minutes. And the Pentagon knows that, they gamed it. Likewise, Washington has failed to defeat Moscow either militarily or economically despite a set of unprecedented measures taken by the U.S., its NATO allies and partners against Russia. Russia survived everything that the West threw against it after the start of the special military operation, especially the economic war, the financial war, Escobar said. And Russia survived and resisted. And now it's even growing again with the 3% inflation, where we have nations in Europe with 10-20-30% inflation and floundering. What's more, the Biden administration's provocations and bellicose rhetoric against Russia and China has served to push the two great powers closer together. In March, Chinese President Xi Jinping paid a 3-day visit to Moscow at the invitation of his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Observers have drawn attention to the fact that Russia became the first foreign state visited by Xi after his historic re-election on March 10. Commenting on the development, Chinese observers told Sputnik that Russia and China have entered a new stage of comprehensive cooperation and strategic partnership. That is how Team Biden has turned Brzezinski's nightmare scenario of a grand coalition between Moscow and Beijing into reality. What is behind Russia's resilience? According to Escobar, Moscow has spent much of the past decade preparing for the West's hybrid and financial war. Russian policy makers began game planning for a potential showdown shortly after a US-backed coup in Kiev usurped power in Ukraine. If the SMO had been launched in 2014, Russia would not have been ready economically, financially, and even militarily for it. Now they are. I'm sure that Elvira Nabiullina, at the Russian Central Bank, knew exactly what she did. This probably had been discussed for at least 2 years at the highest level at the Security Council level, he said. Escobar's skepticism about the effectiveness of Western sanctions was confirmed when the veteran journalist arrived in Moscow in February 2023. He told Sputnik that he was stunned by how normal life was in the Russian capital despite unprecedented outside pressure. My first day I arrived at Vnukovo Airport, I left my bags at my studio and I went for a 7-hour walk around the city, not to have an intellectual experience, but the gut feeling, the veteran journalist recalled. How does it feel to be in Moscow now? So, I did not see a fragile, shattered economy. I did not see a country under sanctions that was like I remember seeing Iran under sanctions, and it was very, very tough. I couldn't feel that here. I saw one of the most beautiful cities in the world with an infrastructure that is absolutely peerless. Anywhere it is extremely clean. That's very important for all of us who live in the West. Compared to New York, compared to Paris, compared to London. People are very well dressed, wonderful restaurants, the supermarkets were stocked with everything. The department stores like Gum or TSUM have everything that you can find in any big capital of the world. People were relaxed and they didn't feel that they were at war. So, my first impression was striking, he continued. The end of Western technological dominance. The Biden administration has repeatedly insisted the United States and its European allies will remain the centers of global technological innovation for the indefinite future. Escobar, who has spent extensive time in both the Middle East and Asia, dismisses these claims as delusional bluster. In fact, a lot of top researchers and tech wizards in Silicon Valley come from China and India. And look at the level of excellence of the Russian military in terms of missile defense systems and hypersonic weapons, Escobar said. When you talk to a very good military analyst like my friend Andrei Martynov, for instance, who lives in the US and writes in English, but knows the Soviet and the Russian military system upside down, he says, look, the gap is at least 2 generations, if not more, and the US won't be able to do it. And the US political leadership doesn't understand simple math or physics, for that matter. And the American system, in terms of the military-industrial complex, it's basically for profit, is not to actually make weapons capable of fighting wars, which is exactly what the Russians do. There has been a technical expertise in Russia since Soviet times. The basis of the hypersonic missile system was laid out already during the Brezhnev era, Escobar said. The collective West's failure to coerce Moscow, Beijing, and most global South powers into submission clearly indicates that the world has irreversibly changed. The world is going through historic times for a shift in our entire existing order. Escobar concurred with Chinese President Xi Jinping, who recently noted that we seem to be witnessing changes we have not seen in 100 years. When we look at what's going on now, this old order is turned upside down completely, Escobar said. China is the most important trade, commercial nation on the planet. By PPP, purchasing parity power, it's already the #1 economy in the world. Russia, after being devastated during the 1990s, now has emerged as the prime military superpower in the world.